The reservation was for 7:30 at Le Bernardin, Manhattan's most exclusive French restaurant. Dad had chosen it specifically for his 65th birthday celebration because, as he'd explained to everyone who would listen, only the most successful people can afford to dine there regularly. I arrived precisely on time, wearing a simple black dress that was elegant but understated. Nothing flashy, nothing that would give my sister Lisa any ammunition for her usual comments about my impractical lifestyle choices. I'd learned over the years that blending into the background was easier than defending decisions they would never understand. The hostess, Marie, greeted me with the warm professionalism I'd come to expect from Le Bernardin's staff. "Good evening, Miss Chin. Your family is already seated at your usual table." I thanked her and made my way through the restaurant's understated elegance, past tables of well-dressed professionals and couples celebrating special occasions. The soft lighting and quiet murmur of sophisticated conversation created exactly the ambience Dad loved to be associated with: success, refinement, exclusivity. Our table was positioned perfectly with views of the kitchen's pass, where I could watch the choreographed precision of the culinary team executing dishes that had earned the restaurant 3 Michelin stars. My family was already there. Dad, distinguished in his best suit. Mom, elegant in navy silk. My older brother David, successful and confident in that particular way that comes from years of professional achievement. Lisa, radiant and sharp-tongued, the golden child who had never met an opportunity to diminish me that she didn't embrace. And David's wife Sarah, whose jewelry collection seemed to grow more impressive at every family gathering. "Amanda." Dad's voice carried that particular tone he used when he wanted to seem delighted but was actually calculating how my appearance might reflect on the family. "You made it. And you look appropriate." I kissed his cheek and took the remaining seat at the round table. "Happy birthday, Dad. 65 looks good on you." "Thank you, sweetheart. Though I have to say I'm impressed you chose such a nice restaurant for tonight." The comment confused me for a moment until I realized he assumed I had made the reservation. In reality, I dined at Le Bernardin regularly, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because it was close to my office and Chef Eric Reipert's innovative approach to seafood aligned with my appreciation for culinary excellence. "This place is incredible," Lisa said, gesturing around the dining room with the enthusiasm of someone experiencing luxury for the first time. "Look at these people, Amanda. These are successful individuals who understand the finer things in life." The subtle dig was delivered with Lisa's signature smile, sweet enough to seem loving, sharp enough to draw blood. My sister had perfected the art of insulting me while maintaining plausible deniability, always able to claim she was just being helpful or showing concern. "The menu is entirely in French," Sarah observed, studying the elegant presentation. "I hope they have translations or we might have to guess what we're ordering." Before I could mention that I was fluent in French, David jumped in with his usual authority. "Don't worry about it. I took French in college. I can handle the translations for everyone." The sommelier, Philippe, appeared at our table with the wine menu. He was a master of his craft, someone I'd worked with many times to select perfect pairings for business dinners. "Good evening," he said with his refined French accent. "May I suggest our wine pairing menu for this evening? We have some exceptional selections that would complement Chef Reipert's tasting menu beautifully." Dad looked overwhelmed by the wine list's prices. "Actually, we'll just take a look at some of your more reasonably priced options." I could see him doing mental calculations, trying to figure out how to afford an evening at one of New York's most expensive restaurants while maintaining his image as someone who belonged in such places. "Perhaps I could recommend something from our selection of excellent wines under $100 per bottle?" Philippe suggested diplomatically. "That would be perfect," Dad said with visible relief. As Philippe departed to retrieve his recommendations, Lisa leaned forward with that gleam in her eyes that I'd learned to recognize as dangerous. "Amanda, I'm surprised you chose such an expensive place for Dad's birthday. Are you sure you can afford your portion of the bill?" The question was loaded with assumptions. Lisa, like the rest of my family, believed I lived paycheck to paycheck, scraping by with my little consulting business, while they enjoyed the fruits of traditional success. "I'll manage," I said simply. "Because if money's tight," David added with false generosity, "Sarah and I could cover your part. We know things have been challenging for you financially." Their concern was genuine but based on completely false premises. They assumed I struggled because I lived modestly, drove a reliable Honda, and worked from home doing what they considered computer stuff that probably doesn't pay very well. What they didn't know was that I owned Chin Analytics, a data intelligence company that provided market insights to Fortune 500 corporations. My little consulting business had generated over $200 million in revenue over the past 8 years, with profit margins that would make their traditional careers look quaint by comparison. "Thank you, but that won't be necessary," I replied. Mom patted my hand with the kind of maternal sympathy reserved for struggling adult children. "Sweetheart, there's no shame in accepting help from family. We all understand that your work situation is uncertain." The waiter, Thomas, approached our table with his characteristic professionalism. I'd known Thomas for 3 years. He was working his way through culinary school while serving at Bernardin, and I'd been quietly helping with his tuition through an educational foundation I'd established. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Bernardin. May I tell you about tonight's specialties?" As Thomas described the evening's offerings with the expertise that made Bernardin's service legendary, I watched my family's faces. They were impressed but clearly out of their depth, trying to appear sophisticated while secretly worried about pronunciation and pricing. "Everything sounds wonderful," Dad said when Thomas finished. "But before we order, could you tell us approximately what we're looking at for the full experience tonight?" Thomas's expression remained perfectly neutral as he provided pricing information that made Dad's face pale slightly. $300 per person for the tasting menu, wine pairings adding another $150 each. For a table of 6, the bill would approach $3,000 before tax and tip. I could see Dad doing rapid mental calculations, probably trying to figure out if his credit card could handle the charge and whether he'd have enough left for the mortgage payment. "Perhaps we could look at some a la carte options?" Mom suggested gently, clearly recognizing her husband's financial panic. "Actually," Lisa interrupted with the confident authority she'd inherited from Dad, "let's do the full tasting menu. It's a special occasion and we all work hard enough to deserve the best sometimes." She looked directly at me as she said this, her smile sharp with implication. "Well, most of us work hard enough." The table laughed, the kind of family laugh that would seem warm to outsiders but carried years of established hierarchy and shared assumptions about who belonged where in our family's success ranking. "Lisa," Mom said with gentle reproof though she was smiling. "What? I'm just being honest. Some of us have built successful careers, gotten married, established ourselves in the real world. Others are still figuring things out." Lisa's voice carried that particular tone she used when she wanted to sound supportive while being devastating. David raised his wine glass. "To Dad, who showed us all what real success looks like. And to his children who are carrying on that tradition of achievement, in their own ways." The toast was inclusive enough to avoid being openly cruel, but exclusive enough to make clear who belonged in the success category and who was being politely accommodated as family obligation. As the evening progressed, the conversation followed its usual pattern. David discussed his latest promotion at the investment firm. Sarah shared updates from her interior design business. Lisa held forth about her marketing company's recent client acquisitions. Each achievement was celebrated. Each success story reinforced the family narrative about who was thriving and who was merely surviving. "The Henderson account alone brought in 6 figures this quarter," Lisa was saying, her voice bright with accomplishment. "It's amazing what you can achieve when you really commit to building something meaningful." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Dad beamed with paternal pride. "You've built exactly the kind of business I hoped you would. Professional, profitable, respected in the community." The comparison to my unprofessional, unprofitable, unrespected work was implicit but unmistakable. The courses arrived with the precision choreography that made Bernardin famous. Each dish was a work of art, perfectly plated and expertly described by Thomas, who treated every table like they were food critics from the Times. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed, tasting the langoustine with sweet pea and mint. "I can't believe places like this exist. It's like eating poetry." "This is how successful people dine," Dad said with satisfaction. "This is the level of quality you can afford when you've built something meaningful with your life." The implicit message was clear. This was not how I typically dined. This was above my usual station, beyond my normal means, a rare treat that I was lucky to experience through family generosity. If only they knew that I dined at Le Bernardin at least twice a month, that Chef Ripert had personally designed a tasting menu for my last business acquisition celebration, that I'd been invited to judge the James Beard Awards 3 years running. As dessert arrived, an architectural marvel of chocolate, gold leaf and technique, Lisa decided it was time for the evening's main event. "Dad," she said, raising her wine glass with ceremonial gravity, "I want to make a toast that's been overdue for years." The table quieted, everyone focusing on the golden child who was clearly preparing to deliver something significant. To a man who taught his children the value of hard work, determination and excellence. Who showed us what it means to build something lasting, something meaningful, something that provides security and pride. Murmurs of agreement around the table. Dad was glowing with paternal pride. And to his children who have honored that legacy by building successful lives and meaningful careers. Her eyes swept the table, landing on David and Sarah with warm inclusion, then settling on me with cool assessment. Well, most of his children. The laughter that followed was inevitable. The kind of family laughter that bonds insiders while excluding outliers, that reinforces established hierarchies while maintaining plausible deniability about cruelty. "Lisa," Mom said, but she was smiling. "What? I'm just being honest. We all know Amanda is our family disappointment." The words hit the table like a physical blow. Not whispered or implied this time, but declared openly, confidently, with the certainty that everyone would agree. And they did. David chuckled. "Come on, Lisa, that's harsh." "But accurate," she replied smoothly. "Amanda, you're 34 years old. You live in a tiny apartment, you drive a car from 2015, you work alone in your pajamas doing what exactly? Data analysis? Computer consulting? None of us can even explain what you do for a living." The attack was precise, systematic, delivered with the confidence of someone who knew she had the entire table's support. "You've never been married, never bought a house, never built a team or managed employees or created something that matters to anyone but yourself. You're the family member we love but don't respect, the one we worry about but can't help because you refuse to acknowledge reality." She paused for effect, her smile bright with the satisfaction of finally saying what everyone had been thinking. "So yes, Amanda is our family disappointment. It's not cruel to acknowledge the truth." The table erupted in laughter. Relieved laughter, the kind that comes when someone finally voices what everyone has been thinking but no one has been willing to say. "She's not wrong," David said through his laughter. "Amanda, we love you, but you have to admit your life choices have been unconventional." "Unconventional is generous," Sarah added. "I'd say impractical." Even Mom was smiling, though she tried to soften it. "We just worry about you, sweetheart. We want you to be happy and secure, and your current path doesn't seem to lead anywhere sustainable." Dad nodded solemnly. "Amanda, we've all been thinking it. Lisa just had the courage to say it. You're intelligent, you're capable, but you've made choices that have led you away from real success rather than toward it." The laughter continued as they bonded over their shared assessment of my failures. The family disappointment, finally identified and labeled, while they celebrated their own achievements in one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. I sat quietly through the character assassination, watching their faces, listening to their laughter, feeling the familiar sting of being misunderstood by the people who were supposed to know me best. Then Thomas appeared at the table carrying the leather folder that contained our bill. The laughter died as everyone remembered that someone would actually have to pay for this evening of luxury. Dad's expression shifted from jovial to anxious as Thomas placed the folder in front of him. "Take your time," Thomas said diplomatically, stepping back to give the table privacy for what was clearly going to be an uncomfortable moment. Dad opened the folder and I watched the color drain from his face as he processed the total. $3,247. More than he'd spent on a single meal in his entire life, more than he could afford without serious financial consequences. "Oh," he said quietly, his voice tight with panic. "What's wrong?" Mom asked, though she clearly suspected. It's more than I expected. Significantly more." The table went silent as everyone realized that Dad, who had chosen this restaurant to showcase his success, couldn't actually afford to pay for the experience he'd orchestrated. "How much more?" David asked carefully. "About double what I budgeted for." The silence that followed was excruciating. Everyone wanted to help, but no one wanted to volunteer to significantly increase their share of an already expensive evening. Maybe we can put it on multiple cards? Sarah suggested. Or ask them to split it differently? Mom added hopefully. Dad pulled out his credit card with shaking hands, probably praying that somehow his limit would cover the charge. Thomas processed the payment discreetly, then returned to the table with an expression that conveyed everything we needed to know without saying a word. "I'm sorry, sir, but this card has been declined. Would you like to try another form of payment?" The humiliation was complete. Dad, who had brought his successful family to an expensive restaurant to celebrate his achievements, couldn't afford to pay the bill. The man who had just agreed that his daughter was a disappointment was about to be embarrassed in front of the very daughter he'd dismissed. "Let me try my debit card," he said desperately. But I could see in his eyes that he knew it wouldn't work. He'd already calculated the numbers, already knew he didn't have $3,000 available across all his accounts. David reached for his wallet. "Dad, let me help." "No," Dad said sharply, his pride wounded. "This is my dinner, my celebration. I should be able to handle this." But he couldn't handle it, and everyone at the table knew it. That's when Thomas looked directly at me. "Should I put this on your usual account, Miss Chin?" The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples of confusion and disbelief that spread across the table. "My usual account? What?" Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. Thomas maintained his professional composure, but I could see the slight smile in his eyes. He'd served me dozens of times over the past 3 years, had processed hundreds of thousands of dollars in charges to my various corporate and personal accounts, had watched me host business dinners that made tonight's bill look modest. "Your usual account, Miss Chin?" he repeated, his voice carrying just enough emphasis to make clear that this was indeed a routine question. The silence at the table was absolute. Every eye was focused on me, every mind trying to process information that didn't fit into their understanding of reality. "Yes, Thomas, that would be fine. Put it on the Chin Analytics corporate account." He nodded professionally. "Of course. Should I add the usual 25% gratuity?" "That would be perfect." As Thomas walked away to process the payment, I looked around the table at the faces of my family, the people who had spent the evening laughing about my failures while being completely ignorant of my actual circumstances. "What just happened?" David asked, his voice shaky with confusion. "I paid for dinner," I said simply. "But he said your usual account." "What does that mean?" "It means I dine here regularly, David. It means Thomas knows me as a frequent customer rather than someone who's never been here before." Dad was staring at me like I'd suddenly grown wings. "Amanda, how do you have a corporate account at Bernardin? How do you dine here regularly?" "Because Chin Analytics generates enough revenue to support regular business dining at establishments of this caliber." "Chin Analytics?" Lisa's voice was sharp with disbelief. "Your little consulting business?" "My data intelligence company, which provides market analysis and strategic insights to Fortune 500 corporations. We generated $47 million in revenue last year." The numbers hit the table like a physical force. $47 million. More money than any of them had ever imagined in personal terms, generated by the family disappointment they'd been mocking all evening. "That's not possible," Sarah whispered. "It's completely possible, Sarah. And this year we're on track to exceed $60 million, thanks to new contracts with 3 major financial institutions and 2 tech companies." Mom was shaking her head slowly, like she could make the information disappear through denial. "But Amanda, you work from home. You don't have an office, you don't have employees." "I work from home because I prefer the flexibility, and because my work is primarily analytical rather than administrative. But Chin Analytics employs 43 people across 3 offices, with our primary operations center in Lower Manhattan." I pulled out my phone and showed them the company website, the executive team page featuring my photo as founder and CEO, the client testimonials from household name corporations. "You see, while you've all been assuming I was struggling as a freelancer, I was building a company that provides mission-critical intelligence to some of the most successful businesses in the world." The impact of that statement was visible on every face. Years of assumptions, years of pity and condescension, years of treating me like the family member who needed guidance and support, all of it crumbling in the face of undeniable evidence. Thomas returned with the receipt, which he placed discreetly beside my plate. Thank you, Ms. Chin. As always, it's been a pleasure serving you and your guests tonight. After he left, the silence stretched endlessly. Finally, Dad found his voice. Amanda, if this is true, and I'm not saying I doubt you, but if this is true, why didn't you ever tell us? Why let us think you were struggling? Because every time I tried to talk about my work, you changed the subject. Every time I mentioned a business opportunity, you told me to be more realistic. Every time I showed excitement about a client acquisition, you warned me not to get ahead of myself. The truth of those statements was written across their faces. Years of dismissed conversations, interrupted explanations, and gentle discouragement disguised as protective concern. You decided I was a dreamer who needed to be kept grounded, rather than an entrepreneur who needed to be encouraged. But Amanda, Lisa said desperately, how was I supposed to know? You live in that small apartment, you drive that old car, you never display any signs of wealth or success. Because I choose to live below my means, Lisa. Because I'd rather invest profits than waste them on status symbols to impress people whose opinions don't actually matter to me. The weight of that statement settled over the table like a heavy blanket. People whose opinions don't actually matter to me. You mean us, David said quietly. You mean our opinions don't matter to you. I mean that trying to impress people who have already decided you're unsuccessful is a waste of time and energy. I mean that building real value is more important than displaying fake wealth. I gestured around the restaurant, where other diners were enjoying their evening without any awareness of our family drama. Lisa, you've spent the entire evening talking about your six-figure quarter like it was the pinnacle of business achievement. Chin Analytics generates that much revenue every 6 days. The comparison was brutal but necessary. David, you're proud of your promotion to senior analyst. I employ senior analysts, 12 of them, and their combined salaries are probably more than you'll earn in the next 5 years. Amanda, Mom said weakly, you were just trying to make yourselves feel better about your own achievements by diminishing mine. You needed me to be unsuccessful so you could feel successful by comparison. The truth of that statement was undeniable and everyone at the table knew it. So when Lisa announced that I was the family disappointment, I continued, and when all of you laughed and agreed, you were actually celebrating your superiority over someone who had quietly built something larger than all your achievements combined. The humiliation was complete now, but it wasn't cruel, it was educational. They needed to understand not just that they'd been wrong about my circumstances, but that their need to be right had revealed something important about their own character. Thomas approached the table one final time, carrying a small plate with several business cards. Miss Chin, Chef Ripert asked me to give you these. He's launching a new restaurant concept next year and would love to discuss potential investment opportunities when you have time. He placed the cards beside my plate and departed, leaving my family to process yet another confirmation that their disappointing family member moved in circles they hadn't even known existed. The chef wants you to invest in his new restaurant? Dad's voice was barely audible. Eric and I have discussed several opportunities over the years. Chin Analytics has a hospitality consulting division that's been quite successful. The revelations just kept coming, each one further demolishing their understanding of my life and capabilities. Amanda, Lisa said, her voice small and uncertain, I need to apologize. What I said about you being our family disappointment. I was completely wrong. You weren't wrong about what you thought, Lisa. You were wrong about what you didn't know. But how could we not know? How could we be so wrong about something so significant? Because you decided what success looked like, and when my reality didn't match that picture, you concluded I was failing rather than reconsidering your assumptions. I stood up from the table, my simple black dress somehow looking more elegant now that they understood it was a choice rather than a limitation. The bill is handled, the tip is included, and your assumptions have been corrected. I hope Dad had the birthday celebration he wanted. Amanda, wait, Dad called out as I prepared to leave. Can we talk about this? Can we? We can talk when you're ready to know your daughter for who she actually is, rather than who you think she should be. As I walked through Lou Bernardin toward the exit, I heard the urgent whispered conversations erupting behind me. By tomorrow they would have looked up Chin Analytics online, verified my claims, and begun the difficult process of reconciling years of assumptions with an entirely different reality. The next morning brought a flood of calls and texts. Dad wanted to meet for lunch to discuss everything properly. Mom left voicemails apologizing for misunderstanding my situation. David wanted to know if I had any job openings at my company. But the message that surprised me most came from Lisa. I've spent all night thinking about what I said, and I realize I wasn't just wrong about your success. I was wrong about what makes someone worth respecting. Can you forgive me? I called her back that afternoon. Lisa, there's nothing to forgive. You were operating with incomplete information. But the information was incomplete because I never bothered to get complete information. I made assumptions and then stopped looking deeper. What matters is what you do now. I want to understand your business. I want to learn about what you've built. I want to be the sister Elena deserves, not the sister who tears her down to build herself up. Over the following months, my relationship with my family transformed completely. Instead of being the unsuccessful child who worried everyone, I became the business leader whose advice was actively sought. Dad started consulting me about his retirement investments. Mom began introducing me to friends as our daughter who runs a data analytics company. And David asked for recommendations about transitioning from employee to entrepreneur. But the most meaningful change came from Lisa. She enrolled in data analytics courses, read industry publications, and genuinely tried to understand the business I'd built. She didn't just apologize for her assumptions. She worked to educate herself about the field she'd dismissed as unimportant. 3 months later, we returned to Bernardin, this time for Lisa's birthday, and this time with everyone fully aware of the circumstances. When Thomas greeted me by name and asked if we wanted our usual table, my family smiled with genuine pride rather than confusion. During dinner, Dad stood to make a toast. I want to say something about my daughter Amanda, he began, his voice carrying clearly across our table. 3 months ago I thought I knew who she was and what she was capable of. I was wrong about everything. He looked directly at me, his eyes bright with genuine pride. Amanda didn't just build a business. She built it while maintaining her values and her humility. She didn't just achieve success. She achieved it without letting it change her character. She didn't just become wealthy, she became wise. He raised his glass to our small family gathering. To Amanda, who taught us that the people we think we know best are sometimes the ones who surprise us most. Who taught us that success comes in many forms. Who taught us that assumptions are the enemy of understanding, and that love should be unconditional. As everyone raised their glasses and applauded, I felt a completeness that no business achievement had ever provided. The $60 million company had been satisfying to build, but the respect and understanding of my family was worth infinitely more. Later that evening, as we prepared to leave the restaurant, Thomas approached me with a smile. Miss Chen, it's been wonderful to see your family learn to appreciate what an extraordinary person you are. Thank you, Thomas. That means a lot. We've all watched you dine here for years. Always gracious, always generous, always treating everyone with respect regardless of their position. Your family is lucky to have you. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey from being labeled the family disappointment to being celebrated as the family success story. The $47 million business had been satisfying to build, but the authentic relationships I'd rebuilt with my family were worth infinitely more. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Thank you for not giving up on us even when we gave up on understanding you. You are extraordinary, and I promise to never forget that again. I smiled, thinking about how a single evening at Bernardin had transformed not just my family's understanding of my success, but their understanding of what success actually means. Because sometimes the greatest achievement isn't just proving people wrong about your capabilities. It's teaching them that love and respect can coexist with honesty, that family relationships can survive truth-telling, and that the most powerful response to being underestimated is not anger but grace. That's not just business success. That's everything.